Part of I'm representing the college on the County Prevention Coalition, and one of the things they wanted us to do is do an environmental scan of specific neighborhoods, and I thought it might be cool for you guys to do that, because then you can see like how it's done. Because remember, this wasn't part of the field 20 years ago.
So how do we encourage them to get those papers to you?
What has been done before, if you don't have electronic access, is since you're the college too, you can send an intercampus mail to counseling, to my attention. And some people have also like faxed stuff to counseling as well. It's the counseling department.
Okay, so we just send it to the girls and staff.
Right, and they can fax it to counseling.
Okay.
Or intercampus mail, however they want to do that. Let's see, what is it today? Sorry to do this. The equipment is still. I have to see them about this. Where did we leave off? Here we go. All right. So, any questions from last time or the readings? Nope. 9? All right. So where we left off is the psychosocial. So psychologically, part of what's happening with this model, and one of the things that we're looking at with clients, is what is happening as a result of the addictive process, psychological and emotionally. And one of the things you have to keep in mind from our understanding now, the addictive process is not just the substances they've been using and the recovery from them. It is also their psychological upbringing from whatever their family of origin is, and that might not be their biological family. Like if a person is, for example, gang identified, the gang has acted as their family, and that they raise them with street values, not necessarily Ozzie and Harriet family values. Okay, and that means that they're going to be suspicious of social structures, and if you're part of a social structure, yeah, that's you. And so you're going to have to, earn their trust, but also, talk about appropriate boundaries. Look, we're training to be mandatory reporters. I am a mandatory reporter, so it's going to be a shock to client, especially if they're living in a particular situation where people may not know this, but it is, if mom and dad are fighting physically and that there are kids watching, it is a felony to let that happen. Felony. to allow kids to witness domestic violence and not report it. So if you're a mom who wants to keep the kids, self-report. Looks better than having the neighbors report it, as an example, right? There are other examples like that. So psychologically, domestic violence also sets up an addictive pattern where even if you do get clean and sober, you can have addictive style relationships. So that's another piece that should be taken into account in terms of not just your social setting, but also what you're thinking. So when we look at just the drugs and we start thinking about what neurochemical systems are being affected, and we'll be learning about neurochemicals in drugs later. And so therefore, one of the things we want to look at what emotions are being generated or suppressed as a result of use. So for example, if somebody's strung out on opiates are painkillers. The physical effect is what's happening with the drug is it's not actually stopping the pain signal, it's changing your brain chemistry so you don't care. And so, as a result of that, you don't care about lots of other things too. You stop feeling. Right? And sometimes, not to harp on the gang thing, but you know, kids who have been raised by the streets, neglected, tend to neglect themselves and don't give an F. Like extended hopelessness and despair, except that they're angry. So they don't want to feel hopelessness and despair. It's easier to be angry all the time. Because who likes being depressed?
Is that with any drug or?
So, for example, anger, you could think of meth as an extended rage. Because what it was designed to do was, no army is going to pass on a drug that you can't fight through. But they are going to give you a drug that will keep you ready to fight and induce a killing rage. And that was one of the original uses of methamphetamine, the beginning of the 20th century, excuse me. It's like an extended rage. So, look at anger issues and other things like that with meth, among other things. Yeah. So what emotions are being generated and suppressed as a result of use? Or if you want to think of it as self-medication, where self-medication comes from is the scientific view that if you're a physician who treats himself as a fool for a patient, so anybody that self-medicates is a fool from the medical point of view. So even if I was, in my history, I used pot to self-medicate anger, which doesn't actually get rid of the anger, but temporarily you don't care. Wow, look at my hand. So what are the problems? This is a question you can ask and also ask of the client to reflect on. They might not know what you're talking about, but you can ask, what are the problems to which addictions are the answer? Or that they're using as an answer? So for example, not just the psychological diagnosis if they have one, but the story behind that psychological diagnosis. It's not what's wrong with them, it's what happened to them. And then when you look at that, what are the healthy pro-social coping skills that need to be taught to substitute for the addictive process? Because your environment is basically teaching you something. There's the obvious message and then there's an underlying message. So for example, if You got neglected by your parents because your parents were loaded and you essentially had to raise yourself. You have to deal with abandonment. Why didn't they love me? And why don't, and that's, well, I don't love me. And if you become a parent, since we don't do parenting school or relationship school or, right, you don't know how to, we teach people how to drive better than, and use their cell phones better than run their lives. Oh, they're using their cell phones to run. So there's a word I just discovered, rediscovered, sublimation. So this was new. So sublimation. So in physics, when an element changes from solid to gas without turning to a liquid. So think about water. Water, ice, evaporates directly into a gas without turning into liquid first. So for example, you got ice cubes in the refrigerator, you filled them up, right? And you leave them for months and months and months, and all of a sudden you look again and half the water's gone or is completely gone. What happened to the water? Well, it evaporated even though it was frozen, and now it's coating your refrigerator. Or you freeze fresh fruits and vegetables, like berries or something like that, and you might have washed them, but there's no water in the bag. You put them in the bag, and all of a sudden, after a month or so, there's ice on the bag. And where did that come from? Well, it came in from inside the fruit or vegetable and went into the bag, but it's got nowhere to go after that, right? So that's sublimation, that process. Solid water comes and evaporates directly into a gas form without being heated up into a liquid first. In psychology, Freud defines sublimation as a sign of maturity. So the example is, you might be angry, and you might take your anger out on violent outbursts or something like that, but you can sublimate, and this is a sign of maturity where you sublimate your anger and work out your anger issues through kickboxing rather than beating people up. I'm not recommending kickboxing for anger issues, but the idea, when we're dealing with recovery issues, you take the impulse to use and both examine the emotional need behind the use and how you used to fulfill it, and then fulfill it in a different way. That's healthier for you. Now, I've said this before, so my thing wasn't drugs, but I had to deal with my anger in some way, so I would usually eat, triggering type 2 diabetes. So why do I have a craving for potato chips when I'm angry? Or sweet things, or alternating. What I should do is drink more water. Why do I feel tired? Oh, drink more water, you'll feel better. Right? So finding a more pro-social, healthier impulse. Where is that impulse coming from? Oh, I feel insecure, I feel shaky. Okay, feel that, but don't do the addictive behavior, do something that's healthier. So most people are taught, and your environmental scan showed you, that people will basically turn to the thing that's advertised most as the first solution outside of themselves. That's essentially what addiction is relying on things outside of yourself instead of knowing that there's inner resources that you can tap into. Now, most of the time we don't talk, in our society, we won't talk about the inner resources.
So could religion be an addiction?
Can be. Sure, I'm Jesus. That's why I need your wife and an arsenal. Branch Davidians, David Koresh. Yeah. the world is coming to end, the feds are coming after us, I need your wife and your children, and we need to arm ourselves because the world is coming to an end. Now that's an extreme example, there are other ones, right? Major organizations, and we're talking about addictive organizations. So there was a piece in the paper recently about an aide to Cardinal Mahoney in Los Angeles. So the Catholic Church has been protecting pedophile priests by transferring them. And this guy apologized for not doing anything while watching that happen. Okay? The church is a mandatory reporter. What should have happened legally is they should have turned those folks in to the police. They did not. That would be an addictive organization. Whatever spiritual benefit people get from Catholicism or whatever. So religion, yes, can be an addictive process. Basically, assume it's an addictive process if you have to lie about it. Now, not all religions or spiritual practices are addictive everywhere. That being said, right? So, what are the social structures, societal structures outside of the person supporting the addiction? What are the social networks the person exists in which support the addiction? In terms of the social part, what are the social networks the person needs to create or participate in to support recovery? And of course, in light of what we were talking about last week, what are the culturally appropriate recovery frameworks necessary for treatment and recovery? Any of you heard of the Wellbriety movement? Okay. As an example, Wellbriety, and you can Google on that term. You can also find whitebison.org. So, Wellbriety movement was started. It's an indigenous recovery framework. A Seneca chief named Handsome Lake, addicted to alcohol 200 some odd years ago, basically got himself clean and sober by recognizing our people didn't actually have alcohol technology, but it got imposed on us by the settlers, some of us, and our lands being taken, so our Indian way of life had been destroyed. And part of that destruction was the forced imposition of alcohol on us. So going through that whole process, he cured himself and basically said part of our recovery is getting our Indian way of life back while existing in the 21st century. But he was 200. This was 200 years ago. So the Wellbriety movement is based on the teachings of that spiritual leader in recovery called Handsome Lake. So it's older than 12-step. And it's native specific. And with that, they basically do sweat lodge ceremonies, various other Native American practices, which could include the use of peyote. Have to be, Native American church member to do that, but that's part of what they do. So, the culturally appropriate recovery frameworks necessary for treatment and recovery. So, tale of two clients. These are, I just changed the name. Actual people, not a composite. So as counselors, we'll actually take the stories of several different people and meld them together to talk about them for teaching purposes. You can do that as part of your biopsychosocial recon. You can either create a composite or just change the name of a real person. and analyzed them using this framework. So, 2 clients. Carmen Brightrobe. She is a 50-something heterosexual woman, Hep C positive, Native American, alcoholic in recovery. And Anthony Soprano, 30-something Italian American, DUII client, dual diagnosis. The diagnoses were anxiety disorder and alcohol abuse. So the appropriate DSM numbers for those. So Carmen first. So Carmen's story is she was infected as a teenage injectable drug user, that's IDU, in Oregon. The infection progressed undetected for 30 years. She did not use alcohol even as a teenager. She was doing meth and heroin. Did not use alcohol until the suicide of her husband. 2 days after the death of her husband, she was diagnosed with a near-terminal case of Hep C. Now, near-terminal means this. Basically, once you get infected with the virus replicates. That's why one of the things we want to know when we're checking somebody's infection status is the viral load, i.e. how many particles of virus are there, as well as other immune system factors if we have that for that particular disease. All right, so near fatal means she cannot be injured at all because she'll bleed out. No clotting factor because of liver damage, among other things. Just from that simple infection as a teenager, being undiagnosed.
So that's even like blunt force, like a bruise?
Anything. Kitchen accident. Nothing. She'll bleed out. Almost did. A couple of times. All right, so she found this out 2 days after her husband committed suicide. So think of the psychological impact of that. Double, triple whammy. So she found that out, and the shock of her husband's death and this, neither of which resulted in a referral to grief, medical, or crisis counseling by either a doctor or healthcare worker or police. All right, major life trauma. Right? So the medical community diagnosed that. Police came to tell her about suicide of her husband because, you know, where he was found, et cetera, et cetera. What should have happened, ideally, by any one of those folks, right? And let's say that she lives in this community. I mean, because you also have to think about, you know, what are the resources in the community you have for the people that you're encountering?
Well, don't they usually ask at least if you live alone or send you home with somebody?
There is that, yes. Mm-hmm. So none of that happened here. So she binged on alcohol, drove herself home, hit a pedestrian who lived, and was sentenced to 4 years of prison. This is her first offense in her life. So, and treatment in prison consisted of an offer of meds. Basically, oh, tough luck. That was it. So, while in prison, she was allowed to begin doing Native American sweat lodge ceremonies, which began an exploration of native-based recovery technologies. She was basically on and off the res. That's where injectable drug use occurred. But obviously part of that experience was not really participating in any Native American spirituality or religion or anything like that.
Was she still using when her husband died?
No. She got him clean.
So how could she be in prison if she couldn't be injured at all?
Yeah. For a first offense. Yeah. How could she be? And, you know, again, we have a legal system. So part of, well, right, there are other people around where this happened that have hit people and killed people that didn't get prison sentences. Identical circumstances. Can you guess why the difference in sentence?
Race.
It is there. It is there, right? So, okay, you hit somebody, broken leg, thankfully, but you get 4 years of prison. Somebody who hit somebody and kills somebody may or may not get prison. And it's not a function of the lawyer, necessarily. All right? So, in any case, fortunately in this state, for her, I mean, this is what she credits for as some of her recovery. She essentially was able to hear more about Native American spirituality, and that helped assisted in her recovery. But she had to get it in prison. Now, not that that's the only place that it's available, but it was available at that point. So, because of her medical conditions, she has to be aware of her viral status as well as being able to grieve and heal. I should actually correct that, but grieve and heal properly, which affects her immune status. Because of, if you heard of psychoneuroimmunology. Now, somebody say, one of your classmates said, this is really heavier than last term. Yeah. For pros, you gotta know this stuff. Psycho, neuro, immunology. Basically what that means is your psychological and emotional state affect how your immune system functions. If you feel better emotionally, your immune system functions beautifully. If you get depressed, your immune system tanks as well. And what immune system she has basically has to get, I mean, she's dealing with a lot of stuff, right? So that meant for her, what that means for her, because she's still around. Eating right, exercising, but not injuring herself. Yeah. Lots of walks in nature, things of that nature. But the relatively new field that studies that, psychoneuroimmunology. Right, so processing grief, anger, shame without relapsing on anniversary dates and triggers. And we should let her know, right, that at minimum, you can be grieving for easily 5 years after a death, depending on how close you are. That's normal. Just say that that's normal. Why can't I live? You have to do what you have to do.
But after 6 months, you're diagnosed.
Yeah. Right. Notice a dichotomy there, huh? I think the diagnosis could come sooner too, but so we want them to look out for anniversary dates or other environmental triggers in memory. If there was a traumatic experience, there'll probably be PTSD-like flashbacks. of the event. Stuff could happen, come up in dreams that are vivid enough that you'd have to process them as real events. 2. Lots of different ways of working with this. All right, so she does generic 12-step AA meetings, powwows, sweats, is considering TP meetings, that is peyote meetings, as well as exercises, and she also paints. So often one of the things I do with clients is, what is your art? And they go, what is your art? Are you, do you draw? Do you write? Do you paint? Well, I used to as a kid. Well, I want you to be able to draw your anger, or draw your grief, or break down specific emotions so we can talk about them and you can draw them out. Where are you feeling them in your body? All those different things. So,
Was she addicted to alcohol?
well, yes, she met the diagnostic criteria, but you would meet the diagnostic criteria for that one event if you binge drank and broke